Hey guys, what's up? In this video, I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about critics versus apologists, and I'm going to talk about Ferrum Forge. So, I believe that in the community, there's a divide between two sides. So these are extremes. On this side, we have critics, and on this side, we have apologists. So critics are people who are sort of jaded, no faith, right? They lack faith in companies. And, they don't believe that they're getting what they paid for, what was promised or advertised. Whereas, apologists are people who trust companies, right? So they overall believe in the good intent of companies to do well for their customers. They think critics are going too far, and, they're more flexible in terms of, getting what they paid for. So if something is like supposed to be 61 HRC and it's actually 59 HRC, they're like, you know what, close enough. So that's sort of the difference between critics and apologists. There's also some philosophical differences. So philosophically speaking, critics believe that, criticizing or publicly shaming a company acts as a deterrent so that other companies won't do bad things that are similar. Okay, so public shaming is a deterrent. It also informs other people not to support those companies as long as they continue to be bad. Okay? So apologists, on the other hand, think that, it's a waste of energy to care what other people are doing. They think that, there's so much bad in the world that you can't fix all of it. You'll be happier if you care less about others. And, it's a free market, right? So you have to do your own research. And if you get fucked, then that's your fault because you didn't do enough research. Now, what's the relationship between critics and apologists? Well, critics don't care what apologists do by and large. They just, if apologists don't want to publicly shame companies, then that's fine. But apologists care a lot what critics do. Apologists, say critics should not publicly shame companies, and therefore they are reacting to what critics do. So really it's up to apologists to give us good reasons why we critics should change our behavior. But that's not how it actually works. Apologists rarely ever engage in logical argumentation. So let's just talk about my problems with the apologist side of, the community. So first, let's talk about how it's a waste of energy to care about people you don't know personally. I think it's rather presumptuous to tell other people what is and is not a waste of their energy when it's doing good for them, right? So for example, if someone's collecting rocks and they love collecting rocks and they love having a rock collection, but I don't care about rocks, it's presumptuous of me to go up to that person and say, hey, you're wasting your time collecting rocks, right? Like what they want to do with their energy, as long as it's working for them, like that seems like something that's not my business. The second thing is the argument about there's so much bad in the world that you can't, and you can't fix all of it, so why bother, right? And to that I say, there's plenty of instances in real life where you wouldn't think that way, right? Like, just because you can't fix all the rape in the world doesn't mean that if someone's about to be raped in front of you, you shouldn't try to stop it, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not about trying to fix the world or save the world or, get rid of all the evil in the world. It's just about, in those instances as human beings where we can do something right, why shouldn't we? Especially when it's not even that much effort. It's not that much effort to type an Instagram post. Like, honestly, it's really not. But, it's actually quite dangerous to stop a rape, right? But I still think people should do it. So, I think there's plenty of instances where you actually are at risk when you try to do the right thing, but you should still do it. So, and you're not going to stop other rapes that are happening around the world, but it doesn't matter. That's not related to that specific instance. Then, the idea that you'll be happier if you care less about others. I also think that's a personality thing. Some people care more about others than others, right? I tend to care that people in the knife community, if they're being swindled, I do care about that a lot. Some people don't, but it's sort of weird to tell me what not to care about or what, that I'll be happy if I don't care about those things. That's a very strange thing to project your personality onto someone else like that. Finally, the idea of the free market. So, it is a free market, but that's not, it doesn't mean what you think it means, right? Because a lot of people have interpreted free market to mean that bad people can do whatever they want. The free market also means that good people can shit on bad people when they do bad things. So if you go to a restaurant and they give you shitty customer service and they put bugs in your food and cockroaches, you can leave a bad review. You can report them, publicly to health inspection services. Like there's a lot of things you can do to criticize them publicly, right? So the free market includes all of those things as well. Like, what we do as consumers is vastly impactful in terms of the decisions other free actors and free agents make in the free market. So I just wanted to do that as a summary of, why I'm a critic and why I'm about to criticize a company or, a maker. Because, so many times people are like, oh, why are you complaining about makers? Apologists will be like, hey, this is their livelihood. This is what they do to live. And I'm like, just because you're doing it for a livelihood doesn't mean you're allowed to lie and cheat to people, lie to people and cheat them. Like, you can have a legitimate business and still make enough money to feed yourself and clothe yourself, right? Like you don't need to be a douchebag to conduct business. So I don't think that's a good excuse. Okay, so let's talk about Ferrum Forge. So the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to Ferrum Forge is I want to provide some context by talking about a specific incident. So if you go on Reddit, there's, I think if you type if you go on Reddit, and there's a subreddit called Knife Club, for those of you who aren't familiar with it. And you can go to an archive post that's titled, Cut a Piece of Steak. And I'll put ... But it basically says the Ferrum Forge, Knife Works, Falcon didn't do this. And what this post shows is a picture of a Ferrum Forge Gent, which is a highly satin finished knife in S35VN. And it shows it with massive oxidation and patina, right, which it shouldn't do generally speaking. So it also shows underneath those pictures a picture of messages between the customer of that gent and Ferrum Forge, specifically Elliot, right, and his response to being told that the Ferrum Forge gent was rusting. So here's what he says. He says, this is Elliot. He says, not to sound like a jerk, but why are you telling me? I designed the knife, but that's where my involvement ends. So I'm going to write that down because it's important for us to remember this one. So 1, only design, no involvement in production. Okay? This is what he says to the customer when the customer brings up a problem with the knife, okay? Because I put a 1 here because we're gonna get back to this later. So he says, but that's where my involvement ends. And he says, oxidation depends not just on the chemical composition, but on the finish and the heat treat. And the customer replies, hey, I thought you'd be interested because, it is your design and you have your name on it and your name is associated with the product. So I thought I would just give you a heads up. And in response to that very polite reply, Elliot responded, hey, again, not trying to sound like a jerk, but I know more than you. Yeah, I know, he actually said that. And, he talks about how Mastrop sends randomly selected batches of the steel to get checked by a lab. Now, I have no doubt that the steel is actually S35VN, but it's possible that it wasn't, right? Like, you don't know. Just because you randomly tested some doesn't mean all of them are definitively S35VN. So he shouldn't have been that rude to the customer. In addition, it bothers me when makers say things like, I know more than you. Like, even if you do know more than the customer, there's no reason to do that. But anyway, so what ends up happening is that there's a huge public backlash to this, and it's so big that Elliot actually issues a public apology where he says, an open letter to all my customers. I recently had an interaction with a customer through DM that I regret tremendously. I'll be the first to admit that I have an ego, and in this conversation I lost control. I was arrogant and disrespectful. There's no excuse for my behavior, and I'm taking this very seriously. I became the asshole knife maker that I dislike so much. So now, I'm glad he apologized for being rude, but he never apologizes to the customer for giving him a bad knife, for not attempting to fix the problem at all, for, he doesn't legitimize what the customer said at all, and he doesn't ever acknowledge the fact that the knife was rusting when it shouldn't be, right? Because that's the big problem, right? Is, yes, being rude to your customers is bad, but what's even worse is giving them something that isn't what they paid for, right? That's a huge problem. So I did some digging, and I went to their website, ferrumforge.com, And on their website, they have under their steel tab a description of S35VN. And this is what it says, or this is part of what it says. It says, the way We Knife Co. heat treats it in our production line and most of the collaboration knife models, it actually performs well with regard to edge retention and stability, but it is less corrosion resistant than the way other companies are heat treating it, okay? So, 2, what did it say? Special heat treat for S35VN. Okay? So he claims there's a special heat treat for S35VN where you have greater edge retention and less corrosion resistance. Okay? Now this would explain why the customer's knife was corroding, right? If you had increased edge retention but you lowered the corrosion resistance through heat treat, that would explain why the gent was corroding. So this makes sense, right? If this is true, right? This is a good explanation. So it's curious why he didn't just tell the customer, hey, we heat treat it so that there's less corrosion resistance and higher edge retention. Okay, it's very curious why he didn't mention that to the customer when that would have immediately solved the problem if it were true. So think about that for a second, okay? Now, I said, okay, you know what? I'm gonna verify if this is true, because I don't believe they do a special heat treat. I thought from the beginning that's complete bullshit. There's no way they do a special heat treat for their S35VN. So what I did is I messaged We Knife Company first, right? I DM'd them on Instagram, and an engineer from We Knife told me that they heat treat their S35VN, right? So we said they temper it at 572 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? For those of you who aren't familiar with S35VN heat treat protocols, this falls in the range of what we call standard heat treat. So this is what every other company is doing approximately. Maybe they'll do like 580 or 560, but they're all within that range, okay? So this is not a special heat treat according to We. This is what they do for the Ferrum Forge and We collab knives. So knowing this information already, I emailed Ferrum Forge, right? Because you know what? Sometimes I like catching bad people with their pants down. So this is what they said. I said, hi there. I read on your website that the Ferrum Forge and We Collab S35VN is heat treated differently for more edge retention at the cost of corrosion resistance. Is this higher temper than standard? And how much corrosion resistance is lost, i.e. is it enough to make a difference in use? So I picked those questions very deliberately. Now here's the response. Ferrum Forge. The S35VN is heat treated to have more wear resistance and impact resistance at the cost of slightly less than corrosion resistance. Corrosion resistance isn't lowered enough to make a noticeable difference. It still has far more corrosion resistance than a carbon steel or tool steel. As long as you maintain your knife, you shouldn't have any problems. If you cut food with it, especially red meats and acidic vegetables, make sure to wipe the blade down after you're done using it. Okay, so here he's doubling down and saying, yes, we do a special heat treat. We increase the wear resistance at the cost of corrosion resistance. All right, now here's my email back where I reveal that I actually know the heat treat. I say, hey there, thanks for the quick reply. A We Knives engineer told me that a 572 degree Fahrenheit tempering temperature was used for the Ferrum Forge We collabed, right, 572, which I understood to be standard according to Crucible's datasheets. 1,000 degrees to 1,025 degrees, which is almost double, is supposed to reduce corrosion resistance slightly while increasing edge retention, so that's why I asked if a higher temper was supposed to have been used. It sounds like there's been some miscommunication, and I want to make sure that buying a Ferrum Forge, We Collab, and S35VN will actually mean better cutting performance. In response, they say, this is what they say, the heat treating on the S35VN on the drop Ferrum Forge We Knife collaboration knives is the same as other We knives. So you'll notice they try to shrug it off as if it's nothing, but they said it's a special heat treat, and now they're saying same. It's the same as all the other We knives, okay? Very curious. So, looking at this information, right? We know, so first of all, they said only design, no involvement in production, right? And involvement in production includes telling them to do a special heat treat. So that was weird. Then they said we do a special heat treat, right? And that explains the patina. But then it turns out, oh wait, actually we do the same. So what do you think is the reason for these lies? Like why are they saying different things in response to different people? Okay. Well, in this case, they said it to the customer because by saying they only do the design and have no involvement in production, then the customer thinks, oh, anything wrong with the knife is We's fault, not Ferrum Forge's fault. Okay. But then anytime there's, anytime there's like that, you know, they want to claim that they do better performance than their S35Yen, they can say, oh, we do a special heat treat. It actually cuts longer, right? At the same time, they say that cut tests are invalid. So if you ever cut test one of their knives and it has a bad result, they'll just say, oh, cut tests aren't real anyways, right? And then lastly, when you give them real technical information showing that you know what's up, they're going to say, oh, actually, that's not true. That's not true. It's all just the same. So it's really frustrating when people just lie to your face like this just because they don't know who you are, right? Because I emailed on a separate anonymous email, so they didn't know who I was. I don't think they know who I am anyways, but just in case, I emailed on a random email that I own. And yeah, it's very clear that they're very quick to lie when it's advantageous to them, and that frustrates me. So what other problems do I have with Ferrum Forge? You know, the other thing with Ferrum Forge is that I want to talk more about this part. Only design, no involvement in production. So remember, they said they were not involved in production once the quality of the production knife was questioned. But if you go to episode 3 or 4 of the Knife Nuts podcast, which is I think the biggest knife podcast right now, it's the one where they have Elliot and Chris on for an interview. They claim they are super involved in production. In fact, they claim that they are so involved, they ask for all CAD files, that they control the RPM, or how fast, how many rotations per minute of different spindles and mills. So when it's convenient to them, when the Knife Nuts podcast people are complimenting their production knives, all of a sudden, oh yeah, we're way involved in production. We look at all the CAD files, we control all the RPM and the spindles and mills. Like, we look at every aspect of the process when the knives are good. But when the knives are bad, oh, we're not involved at all. So once again, I don't like that kind of stuff. I think it's really, really I think it's just really shady. Like, that's just what it comes down to. I think it's really shady. I hate that shit. So this is where we're at so far, where we have some discrepancies in what they're saying to different people, right, in different contexts. All right, well, let's talk about some other things. So, you know, actually, let's talk about the stuff that made me not like Ferrum Forge to begin with, before I knew any of this other stuff. You know, why do I even care about Ferrum Forge at all? Like, because, you know, I do dislike them a lot, but it's not just because of this stuff. The biggest thing is when they made a video about HRC. So this video came out recently. They got massive public backlash and they took it down without apologizing for it or explaining any reason why. So that video, you can't find it now. But to summarize what they said, they basically questioned a lot of people in the community and said things like, oh, HRC testing is, you know, not validly done. They were talking about how cardboard cut testing is all fake. Like, they're just basically shitting on people in the community who are trying to provide information. And why would they do that, you think? Well, the reason is because they know they're not providing a good product, right? They don't do a special heat treat. It's all bullshit. So if you HRC test it, you'll find out that's true. But all you have to do is say, hey, the test is false, right? Or you can cut test their knives and find out that the edge retention isn't good. But hey, they can just say, hey, the cut tests are false. So what they're doing is they're preemptively attacking all the tests that would prove that their knives are bad, right? Or that they lied about their knives. So it's actually very intelligent, but it's also very immoral. So let's talk about some of the other things they said. So and I want to point out the hypocrisy in what they're saying by pointing out, I'm not going to put words in their mouth. I'm going to point out specific places where they say contradictory things. So let's talk about 5. They said cardboard cut tests are invalid. They said the reason it's invalid is because there's no ASTM standards. There's no ASTM standards. They said that, you know, your hands aren't steady, human hands. Okay? So they're acting really scientific here. They're saying, hey, cardboard cut tests aren't invalid. You know, human hands are cutting. There's no ASTM standards for cardboard. Now let me take you into the world of Elliot of Ferrum Forge and show you how he tests his knives. So directly from his website, okay, under the SM100 Revolution page, he says, I'm just going to quote this. It's very long. I'm not going to write it all, but I'll write the notes after. Quote, I've been carrying and using an SM100 folder for several months now so I could get some first-hand real-world experience with it. I have to say it more than meets my expectations, and I usually carry LMAX or M390, so that is what I am comparing it to. I am finding the edge retention to be very similar to LMAX, which means in my usage and definition of sharp that it only needs a touch-up every 2 weeks. But I like my knives hair shaving sharp all the time. If my knife is not popping hairs, then it gets a quick strop. What does a knife maker cut on a regular basis, you might ask? A lot of cardboard, plastics, leather, and tree limbs. So Mr. Elliott, no quantification in his testing. He cuts cardboard, which he just said is a bad way to test knives, and he cuts fucking tree limbs. Like, hello? He cuts tree limbs. What is this? Are tree limbs consistent? Do tree limbs have ASTM standards? I'm actually asking. So this kind of stuff pisses me off because it's still on your website, dude. Like, any of your customers can go and see this stuff and just see that you're lying. Like, it's very frustrating when you think people are this stupid. Okay. What else is there? I mean, there's just so much to complain about. Like, they just frustrate me so much. It's just, they make me so angry. Anyway, so let's move these papers aside and do 7. Also in that video, they claim industrial data sheets are the most valid. So these are the data sheets made by the manufacturers of the steel. Okay. And they're saying because they made the steel, they know how to heat treat it best, which is bogus, of course. It's just completely wrong. But the ironic thing is, if you go on Michael Emler's YouTube channel, you can actually see a video where they heat treat M390 to 2200, 1000, 1000. So 2200 OS temp, and then they temper 2 times at 1000, 2 hours each. This is garbage. This is like the worst possible heat treat protocol you could do for M390. So first of all, they don't even follow industrial data sheets themselves, and the way that they don't follow them is in a crappy way. Like, they actually do the worst heat treat for M390 that I've ever seen. And I actually tested this one. I got this one I did this exact protocol, got it cut tested by Tom. It was the worst performing one, even of all my experimental protocols. It is actually garbage. So that's also frustrating because now they're claiming they do the super special heat treat, right, for their M390. They bring up all these lies about how there's like it has the highest impact resistance. And it's funny, he says it in such a douchebag way. He says, oh, what a coinky dink that I'm not putting words in his mouth. He uses the word coinky dink, that it has the highest wear resistance and the highest impact resistance with this heat treat, and it gives 64 HRC. It does none of those things. That is also scientifically impossible that happens, okay? Sorry, my mom just came home. So it's very, very frustrating that they are lying so much about this kind of stuff. Anyway, in addition, let's talk about some other things. So we talked about that. So now I want to talk about why I think they're just bad, right? So I think the Ferrum Forge brothers are incredibly intelligent people. And that's what makes them bad, right? It's because when you say stupid things, but you don't know you're saying stupid things, that's just like, I mean, that just makes you stupid. But when you know you're saying something that isn't true and you say it anyway to make more money, that's when it's bad, all right? So let's talk about a few of those instances where they're lying to make money. So when they say, you can actually see this video. They didn't take this video down where it's like a rant about HRC or whatever. He says HRC is the least important factor in blade performance. Okay, now we all know this is retarded because, I'm sorry for using that word, but like, it's pretty stupid, right? Because HRC is, if not one of the most important, like, it is equal in importance to all the other things. They're all important. Like, none of them are more important than the other. They're all equally important. You have to have good geometry. You have to have a good steel. You have to have good hardness from good heat treat, right? You need all of those things. But he says it's the least important. At the same time, he says 64 HRC is best for M390. He says this on his website in the M390 tab, okay? So, weird, right? So he does it at 64 HRC, or he claims to, and he says that's the best, but HRC is also the least important. But what? Oh, wait. I forgot to mention, this statement is old, and this statement is new. So why did he change from this to this? Why did he change from saying 64 HRC is so good to HRC doesn't matter? Why would he do that? It's almost as if this statement happened at the same time as the We collab started happening, right? So he said this when he started saying that, now that, you know, oh, he's working with We Knives, they are under 60 HRC, so they can't hit 64 or even come close, but these make more money, so let's claim that HRC doesn't matter, right? Let's say HRC doesn't matter then, right? I mean, it's intelligent business-wise, but it's completely disingenuous. Basically, they're saying HRC doesn't matter because we can make production knives now instead, and those are going to be lower HRC, but they'll make us higher margins. Fantastic. Okay, in addition, what else is there? I mean, let's see. Oh yeah, so now let's talk about how smart these guys are, like how I know they're smart, because they are smart. They know they're doing a bad thing. So Chris and Elliot like to talk about how little money they're making all the time, because we all want to act like, you know, we're not making any money off of this, we're not being greedy, you know. So let's talk about some of the things they say. So first thing they say, I'll quote this from their website in their about page. Manufacturing in small batches in the US and California in particular is not cheap, and we actually run our companies by the numbers. Trust me when I say we are not getting rich. In fact, on things like Maker's Choice knives, we don't even make a profit. So let's write that first. Maker's Choice. No profit. That's what he's claiming. He makes no money off of the Maker's Choice knives. So I'll let you decide if you believe that or not. The materials we use and the way we process them is expensive, but it's what we have to do to make the level of knives we make, blah, blah, blah. Then on the Knife Nuts interview, he says he makes, or at the time of that interview, he was saying he was making like $30,000 a year, right? Before taxes. I'll let you decide if you believe that too. But point being, the idea is he's saying we're not making that much money, right? Now, this one in particular is pretty questionable. I don't think they would make Maker's Choice knives and not make any money off of it. They're also, Ferrum Forge has a reputation for being very expensive. I won't say it's impossible. I'll just say based on the other things that they have done and the fact that they're so money hungry, I find it very hard to believe they make knives for free. I don't know. It's just me personally. It's just very, very hard for me to believe that. Now, it could be possible. Maybe they'll reveal spreadsheets showing how they arrived at their prices for their Maker's Choice knives and show how they make zero profit, and we'll see if that's true or not. But hey, I challenge Ferrum Forge to actually do that kind of stuff and disprove any of the stuff I'm saying. Okay, so that I think that about sums up what I wanted to talk about. There's some other things that Ferrum Forge does that's kind of frustrating, like how they suck up to influencers, they'll send free knives. It's kind of annoying, but, a lot of people do that, and I'm not going to hate on them specifically for it. But I think the other stuff that I talked about is pretty egregious. It's very frustrating that they say things that aren't true so often. It's very frustrating that in a straight-up email where I ask them questions, they give me roundabout answers that are also contradictory. I just don't like them. I don't like their personalities. I don't like the way they've conducted themselves in the community. They have a reputation on Blade forums and other forums for having some of the best custom heat treat, when in reality they just make up numbers. Like what is this? 2200, 1000. What is that? Like, what is this based on? So they have this reputation, and all this what it comes down to is, here are the ways that we as consumers and even as other makers get harmed. Okay, so first, they said that HRC is unimportant, right? That harms makers and consumers, because makers who actually give you good heat treats, right? Now our work is invalidated. For consumers who want good knives, their concerns are invalidated. They're going to get soft knives instead. So when Ferrum Forge says HRC doesn't matter, a lot of people listen. Okay, because a lot of people trust them and believe in their work. And that means that makers who have good heat treat and put money into investing in good heat treat, as well as customers who care about that stuff, they get screwed. All right. Then when he says stuff like, then when he says stuff like the 2200, 1000, 1000, and then other makers start doing this, that hurts those makers because they're making bad knives, and it hurts their customers because they're getting bad knives with this bad heat treat that got advertised on Emler's channel. Then there's the fact that We talk about the special heat treat for S35VN, right? Why is that bad? Well, one, because it excuses just what's just a product of bad heat treat and probably an error in the manufacturing process. So people are still going to get oxidation on their S35VN, right? Which is bad for customers because they don't want that. They don't buy S35VN for patina. Okay, like you can get, I mean, some people like patina, and I like patina too, but I don't like it on my stainless steels. So that's not good either, right? So customers are getting, and then that's bad for because is never going to improve their process because it's being excused. There's just so much bad, and there's no good. There's no good to any of this. And then also there's the fact that, they're saying that cut tests are invalid. Like that harms the cut testers' reputations, right? And it also prevents us from building a database and improving knives as a whole, right? Because cut tests are how you decide whether or not you've increased wear resistance in a way that matters or edge retention, right? Like all of this stuff, they in my opinion, Ferrum Forge harms every aspect of the knife community that I care about, and that's why I dislike them so much as makers. I think that, as long as they continue on this path of just complete dishonesty, I'm probably going to keep shitting on them, and I'm not going to feel bad about that. I know this is their livelihood. I know this is what they do for a living and to feed themselves, but there's no reason with their reputation and their standing that they need to lie to make marginal increases in money. Like they can do things more honestly, still make the money they need to survive and have a happy life. Like they don't need to be doing this. So as long as they are, I do not feel bad whatsoever about crapping on them. I'll continue to do so. That's all I have to say. Just want to explain why I'm a critic, why I don't like Ferrum Forge, because people ask me that all the time. They're like, Brian, why do you say you don't like Ferrum Forge? These are all some of the reasons, okay? So with all that said, I'll see you guys next time, and have a good one. Bye.